Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 106, The Battle in the Forbidden Forest. Modesty is good, and caution is wise, but those are skills for later in life. Right now, you could certainly afford to be a bit more daring, Professor Oren said with an air of amusement, as though continuing a lecture. At your age, no one would take an 11-year-old as a serious threat. Kyle kept walking, his expression blank. Unfazed, Professor Oren pressed on, well, now it's your turn. Tell me, Kyle, when did you realize? Kyle blinked, feigning innocence. Realize what? I'm not sure what you mean, Professor. If that's your answer. Professor Oren stopped abruptly, his tone turning icy, then we have no reason to go any further. The air grew tense, and even Kanna, focused on finding Pocky, sensed something was wrong, moving instinctively closer to Kyle. As a defense against the dark arts professor, of course you'd be suspect, Kyle shrugged, keeping his voice steady. Everyone knows the position is cursed. Professors end up in St. Mungo's or Azkaban, or worse. The ones who make it through a term unscathed have to resign for one reason or another. But here you are, near term's end, without so much as a scratch. If that doesn't look suspicious, what does? Well observed, Professor Oren sighed, as though disappointed in the curse himself. I enjoyed being a professor, but unfortunately, my true identity was uncovered. I just received word that the Ministry of Magic is on its way to Hogwarts. Fools, they never imagined I'd hide in plain sight here. Took them long enough to figure it out. Kyle's eyes widened. Wait, the Ministry isn't after the swooping evil, they're after you? Of course it's me. Oren scoffed. Do you think the Ministry would be interested in a mere magical creature? No, they're after something far more valuable. Something I have. Kyle couldn't help but ask, what is it? Are you sure you want to know? Oren raised an eyebrow, smirking. I'd be happy to tell you. On second thought, no. Kyle quickly caught himself, forcing a dry laugh. I'm actually not that curious. Oren's smirk deepened. He glanced at Kanna, whose face now showed a mixture of confusion and horror as she finally grasped the situation. She drew her wand, her hand trembling. Oh, no need to be anxious, Miss Prince, Professor Oren said calmly, not at all fazed by her wand. Instead, he looked off to the side, under a tree. Oh, what have we here? With a flick of his wand, the fallen leaves began writhing, forming coils that twisted around a gray mouse nestled in the roots. Pocky. Kanna gasped, extending her wand shakily. Let her go. Oren, ignoring her, continued in his cool, professorial tone, allow me to teach you something useful. If you want to determine whether the animal in front of you is an animagus, the animagus reversal spell is your best option. He pointed his wand at the mouse and muttered, reveal. A blue light shot from his wand, and the mouse froze midair, writhing in distress. With another flick, the leaves uncoiled, and the mouse fell to the ground. A bright flash of magic followed, and before their eyes, the mouse's form distorted and expanded as though sped up through time. In seconds, the mouse had become a hunchbacked, unsightly witch. The witch was hunched over, her sparse, stringy hair partially covering her sharp, hooked nose. Kanna stared at her in horror, stammering, she. Pocky. P. Ah, so your name is Pocky? Oren said brightly, as though delighted by the discovery. Lovely to meet you. Curse you, the witch rasped, her voice as harsh as metal scraping against stone. She pulled out a short, thick wand and aimed it at Oren, her eyes filled with venom. I'll kill you for this, I'll kill you. A blast of purple light erupted from her wand, hurtling toward Oren's chest. Taking advantage of the distraction, Kyle swiftly pulled 2 broomsticks from his moleskin pouch and thrust one into Kanna's hands. Go. Find Professor McGonagall. Realizing the urgency, Kanna hesitated only for a second before mounting the broom and taking off into the sky. As she rose above the treetops, Kyle didn't follow. He tossed his own broken broom aside, its snapped shaft useless in his hands. On the other side, as the witch's curse flew toward him, Professor Oren sidestepped it with ease. With a small, almost mocking snort, he raised his own wand. Avada Kedavra. A sickly green light shot past the witch's ear, narrowly missing her and striking a small spider on the ground behind her. The unfortunate creature froze instantly, dead on the spot. The witch, terrified, collapsed to the ground, her body trembling uncontrollably. Oren, meanwhile, turned his gaze toward Kyle just in time to see him toss the broken broom aside. "You never cease to amaze me," Oren said, an amused smile flickering across his face. "You were the one who said it." Kyle replied with a grin, "Always have a broomstick handy, it might just save your life." 50 points to Hufflepuff, Oren laughed, his tone dripping with irony. "That's the highest mark I can give." He made no attempt to stop Kanna, letting her vanish into the sky without a second glance. "Kyle, you didn't seem surprised at all just now. Did you already know the rat was an animagus?" With Kanna safely gone, Kyle relaxed a little, rolling his stiff shoulders. "I'd had my suspicions." He explained how he'd become suspicious ever since Kanna mentioned that Pocky had been sick. Then, during a Quidditch match, he'd used the Marauder's map to take note of who was still in the Hufflepuff common room. Among the names, one didn't belong to any known Hufflepuff. But even with that clue, Kyle had hesitated. The idea of two rat animagi at Hogwarts seemed a bit too far-fetched. So he'd been quietly comparing rosters from the other houses, only missing Slytherin's list. "But I guess I don't need it anymore," Kyle finished. "If you knew, why didn't you report it?" Oren raised an eyebrow. "Weren't you worried about that little girl's safety? And why did you bring us to the Forbidden Forest?" Kyle shrugged. "This is Hogwarts, I didn't think she'd actually dare do anything." Oren chuckled lightly. "You're even sharper than I expected." His expression quickly hardened as he turned to the witch slumped on the ground. "Kill the boy, and you're free to go." "So this is it, then," Kyle thought, a faint smile touching his lips as he reached for the ring on his finger. But Oren's voice cut in. "You might have some tricks up your sleeve, but I'd advise against using them. Remember, I have a swooping evil, want to guess where it is right now?" Kyle's eyes narrowed as realization struck him. "You." In that split second of hesitation, the witch's curse was already upon him. Kyle dropped backward, managing to dodge the spell, albeit with little grace. The deep purple charm struck a tree behind him, instantly corroding a large section of the trunk. Oren set down an hourglass on a nearby stone, its sand beginning to trickle downward. 10 minutes, he said, almost to himself. "After that, the swooping evil will be back. Good luck." 10 minutes, Kyle thought, gritting his teeth. He saw a massive fireball hurtling toward him and bolted deeper into the Forbidden Forest, hoping the thick underbrush would help shield him from the witch's attacks. As he dodged through the trees, frustration boiled inside him. This isn't fair, he thought bitterly. Why did Harry Potter get villains like the forgetful Lockhart or bumbling Quirrell, while he had to face someone like Oren, whose mind was sharper than a bag of enchanted needles? Why? On the other side, the witch grew frantic as her spells continued to miss Kyle. Oren's ultimatum hung over her head: if Kyle was still standing in 10 minutes, her life would be forfeit. Petrificus totalis. Levi corpus. Corrosis. Her spells flew wildly as she chased after Kyle, who weaved through the forest with quick, unpredictable turns. Suddenly, her steps faltered, the ground beneath her feet felt soft and strange, like stepping into mud. She lost her balance and tumbled forward, landing with a painful thud. Kyle had stopped a short distance away, and he quickly turned, aiming his wand at a nearby tree. Spungify, he incanted, and the towering tree beside the witch began to sway. Its trunk, softened by the spell, drooped under its own weight and toppled toward her like a thick rope of spaghetti. Though softened, the tree's mass hadn't changed, and its thick canopy, as wide as a millstone, plummeted straight for the witch. Her face blanched, and she scrambled to get out of the way. Without missing a beat, Kyle levitated several sturdy branches from the forest floor. With a flick of his wand, he transfigured the branches into sharp, stone-tipped stakes and launched them at the witch. Seeing the incoming spikes, the witch screamed, "Dash!" Desperation tinged her voice, but her shield charm was only half-formed when, boom! The massive tree finally crashed to the ground, the impact so thunderous it sent flocks of birds scattering from the trees. When the dust settled, a large crater lay where the tree had landed. Inside, the witch lay trapped, groaning in agony. Her arm was pinned beneath the tree's trunk, and a stone stake protruded from her leg, rendering her completely immobile. The skirmish had unfolded quickly and ended even more swiftly, leaving Oren standing there, momentarily stunned. He'd expected Kyle to rely on higher-level spells to subdue her, but the boy had used only the simplest of charms, a pair of softening charms, a levitation charm, a basic transformation, and a locomotion charm. Spells any young wizard could cast. Yet with creativity, Kyle had turned them into a devastating attack. Kyle wasn't surprised at how quickly the witch went down. After all, he'd spent 2 weeks studying the biography of a duel master. He had to have gained something from it. Using traps, leveraging the terrain, and finishing off an opponent already disadvantaged were dueling basics. Besides, the witch was a terrible fighter. Her spell choices spoke for themselves. Aside from the corrosion curse, her repertoire consisted of Levi Corpus, Petrificus Totalis, and the Blasting Curse. Most of those were standard spells for third years, with the Blasting Curse being only slightly more advanced. And she had fallen for a simple bait tactic. Kyle couldn't help but wonder if she'd somehow bought her Animagus ability, if such a thing was even possible. Expelliarmus. Kyle walked up to the witch and confiscated her short wand, tucking it into his robe pocket. "Well done, 50 points to Hufflepuff," Oren applauded, though his voice was laced with sarcasm as he pointed his own wand at Kyle. "So, do I need to give you a head start?" Kyle didn't budge. "Professor Oren?" he asked, genuinely puzzled, "Why are you targeting me? Even if I took one of your billywigs last month, it's hardly worth all this. I could give you 10 in return if you like." Oren's expression darkened, and his hand trembled slightly, grip tightening on his wand. "This isn't about that," he replied through clenched teeth. "You're Chris's son. If he hadn't interfered with my affairs all those years ago, I wouldn't be in this mess." His eyes narrowed suddenly, suspicion dawning. "Wait, you're stalling for time, aren't you? You don't really expect those ministry fools to rescue you, do you?" "I am stalling, but not waiting for a rescue," Kyle said, holding Oren's gaze. "I wanted Kanya to leave, but not just for her safety." "Oh. So-called friendship, then?" Oren scoffed. "Partially," Kyle replied with a shrug, "but mainly because there are things on me she shouldn't see." Before Oren could retort, he screamed, his face contorting as he looked down to see 2 green, spherical cabbages biting into his leg. A sudden wave of numbness washed over him, momentarily robbing him of his senses. Expelliarmus. A jet of red light flew from Kyle's wand, but Oren managed to roll out of the way, though his leg throbbed painfully where the cabbages had bitten him. Glancing down, he cursed. Chinese chomping cabbages. In the forbidden forest, he snarled through gritted teeth. "I brought them," Kyle replied coolly, sending another disarming charm his way. "Hogwarts is dangerous. Even Hagrid's been attacked, so it's only reasonable for an unarmed young wizard to carry a little protection." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 107, Apparition. As Kyle had planned, after learning of Hagrid's attack, he'd gone to the room of requirement to retrieve the 2 chomping cabbages, storing them in his modified mokeskin pouch. This pouch, an upgrade of the one Newt had gifted him, allowed him to carry both magical creatures and plants, albeit in limited quantities. He'd originally intended to use the cabbages to ambush the witch, but they'd ended up coming in handy against Oren instead, a satisfying turn of events. Meanwhile, Oren was in a grim struggle on the ground, rolling around to avoid both the chomping cabbages gnawing at his legs and Kyle's relentless stream of disarming and stunning charms. Enough. Oren spat, deflecting yet another disarming charm. He took a swift bite from one of the cabbages and finally managed to cast his own spell. Incendio. Scarlet flames erupted from his wand, blackening the cabbages until they fell still. Breathing heavily, Oren straightened, his expression steely. I admit it, I underestimated you. Oren raised his wand, and the surrounding fallen leaves transformed into sharp, whirling blades that hurtled toward Kyle. Confringo. Kyle aimed his wand at the ground, setting off an explosion that cloaked the area in dust. Blinding me? Not a bad strategy, Oren sneered, eyes narrowing as he unleashed the leaf blades into the smoke. But where can you hide? The blades rained down over the area, scattering through the dust. Oren smirked, satisfied. Stupefy. A voice rang out suddenly from behind, sending a jolt of alarm through Oren. It was Kyle's voice, but how? How had he gotten behind me? Before he could react, he felt a weight against his back, and then, bang. The spell had hit, but the swooping evil unfurled from behind him like a shield, blocking the stunning spell just in time. Kyle staggered as pain surged through him, fighting to keep his focus. The swooping evil, it didn't go after Konna, he rasped. Oren turned, a mocking smile on his face. Who said it was ever after the girl? I simply asked you to guess where it was. He chuckled, amused. First the chomping cabbages, now apparition mid-battle, you've impressed me today, Kyle. Compared to you, I've wasted my first year here. How about I let you go as a reward? Oh. Letting me go? Don't flatter yourself, Kyle replied, defiant. Do you think you can kill me? Oren hesitated. He didn't believe Kyle could best him outright, but he'd lost the element of time. The ministry was closing in, and every second he wasted here brought him closer to capture. But to walk away after being matched by an 11-year-old? It would ruin him. You're really not leaving? Oren asked, trying to mask his frustration. Nope. Kyle shrugged, idly scratching a billywig perched on his shoulder. 5 minutes earlier, Kyle would have turned and run without a second thought, but not now. He had been threatened, deceived, and mocked. He wouldn't let that go unchallenged. Besides, this was the Forbidden Forest. Kyle wasn't the one who had to hurry now. You want to die? Oren's face twisted in fury, realizing that the billywig resting on Kyle's shoulder was the very one he'd lost. Raising his wand, he began to gather a sickly green light at its tip. Avada, whoosh. An arrow sliced through the air, forcing Oren to retract his arm to avoid being hit. The pounding of hooves grew louder, and a group of centaurs burst from the trees, longbows drawn, arrows aimed at both Kyle and Oren. Though their eyes narrowed particularly on Oren, some of the centaurs recognized Kyle. Forenza stepped forward cautiously, addressing Kyle. You're a student from the castle. What are you doing here? And who is this? A dark wizard. Kyle said urgently. He's the one who stole the unicorn's cub, and he used unforgivable curses. In an instant, all the centaurs shifted their aim squarely onto Oren. Suddenly, explosions sounded all around them. The ministry had arrived. You're in luck. Oren said, a bitter smile stretching across his face. All right, I give up. He tossed a cloth bag to Kyle. Inside was the unicorn's cub, its small golden body curled up peacefully, appearing as though it were asleep. It's him, a voice called out. A hit wizard stepped forward, teeth clenched in recognition. Morris Oren. The wizard was Had, the same captain of the hit wizards who had previously tried to arrest Hagrid. We meet again, Mr. Brave Hit Wizard, Oren mocked with a twisted grin. You had a chance to arrest me before, but you failed. I should thank you for letting me slip away. "Oh, wait," he sneered, "you fools only knew about the swooping evil, you never figured out who I was. So, thanks for absolutely nothing. You're not getting away this time." Had snapped, aiming his wand at Orin. "I'll personally escort you to Azkaban. We'll see if you're still smiling when the Dementors get to you." "Sorry, I'm not a fan of Dementors," Orin replied with a sigh. "Could I stay at Hogwarts instead? Being a defense against the dark arts professor has been quite educational." "That's not up to you," Had barked, gesturing to the other hit wizards, who swiftly raised their wands in unison. Stupefy. Expelliarmus. Incarcerus. A flurry of spells shot towards Orin. A dozen charms shot toward Orin from every direction. "What a shame, I haven't even graded the exam yet." Orin sighed, and the platform of fallen leaves beneath him instantly gave way. With no footing, Orin started to fall, letting him evade every charm aimed at him. The next moment. Pop! A familiar popping sound echoed through the forbidden forest as Orin vanished from sight. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 108, Teasing kids out of boredom. The hit wizard scoured the pile of leaves for ages but, in the end, only found half of a shoe sole, marked with teeth. Orin must have damaged his shoe earlier when he was kicking a chomping cabbage, which had clearly gnawed at it. Perhaps he had dropped it while escaping, or maybe he'd left it there on purpose. Hit Wizard had stood nearby, his expression dark as storm clouds. He knew exactly what awaited him next. Failing to apprehend anyone would be seen as a grave oversight, and coupled with Orin's parting words, was practically the obvious choice to take the fall. The Ministry would surely blame him for letting Orin escape, especially that meddlesome pink toad. A demotion would likely be the least severe punishment to quell the anger back at the Ministry. Furious, had bellowed orders, commanding the hit wizards to search the vicinity for any trace of Orin. The centaurs tried to stand in their way, but had brandished his wand, forcing them back. "That's an important prisoner of the Ministry of Magic. If any of you dare obstruct this search, you'll all be considered accomplices." Under his threat, the centaurs kept silent. But none of this concerned Kyle anymore. Professor McGonagall had arrived. Her face was a sight Kyle had never seen, pale with tightly pressed lips, and anger that chilled to the bone. The idea that the defense against the dark arts professor would attempt to kill a student was beyond her worst fears. Had Dumbledore completely lost his senses when he hired Orin? Taking a quick glance around, Professor McGonagall hurried over to Kyle, her voice low but tight with worry. "Are you alright, Kyle? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Professor," Kyle replied. Thanks to the centaurs and the hit wizards, Orin didn't get a chance to do anything before they drove him away. The nearby hit wizards looked momentarily stunned, but soon their relief was palpable, as if a great weight had lifted. With Kyle's casual remark, the entire situation shifted. No longer was this a failure, with a dangerous prisoner on the loose. Instead, they had successfully saved a student from a dark wizard. What had started as a botched capture was now, well, a victory of sorts. And if they hadn't made a mistake, then all the better. One by one, the hit wizards approached Kyle, asking after his health with exaggerated concern, each trying to seem like a caring adult neighbor. Had was the most enthusiastic of all, and, after confirming that Kyle was unharmed, he assured him that the Ministry of Magic would take full responsibility for any impact and losses from the incident, with compensation to follow. He gave Kyle a meaningful wink as he said this. Kyle got the message immediately but remained calm on the surface. It seemed his garden could stand to expand a bit next year. Unlike the hit wizards, Professor McGonagall was clearly unconvinced by Kyle's words. The area around them in the Forbidden Forest was a wreck, with magic scorch marks everywhere and fallen trees littering the ground. It hardly looked like nothing had happened. Yet McGonagall said nothing more, focused only on ensuring Kyle was truly unharmed. At that moment, Professors Flitwick and Sprout arrived. Taking in the scene, Professor Flitwick clenched his fists, and Professor Sprout's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Professor McGonagall dismissed the hit wizards, then turned to take Kyle back to the castle. "Oh, Professor McGonagall," Kyle said, pointing to a spot nearby before they left, "there's a witch trapped under that tree. She's an illegal animagus who's been lurking around disguised as Conna's pet." Professor McGonagall froze in her tracks. "Animagus?" "Yes," Kyle continued. "She tried to attack me after I uncovered her identity. She's the one responsible for most of the charms around here." "By Merlin's beard," Professor McGonagall muttered, overwhelmed by the information. They still hadn't sorted out what had happened with Orin, and now there was an illegal animagus to deal with. This year at Hogwarts was like no other. Still, now that she knew, Professor McGonagall wouldn't let it go unchecked. She led Kyle, along with Professors Flitwick and Sprout, to the place he indicated. By now, the witch had fainted, and 2 hit wizards were pulling her out from under the fallen tree. Professor Flitwick gasped at the sight of her. "My boy, did you do this?" "I didn't mean to," Kyle replied, looking down. "I just didn't realize she was so fragile." Kyle then gave a brief rundown of the events, though he purposely left out the beginning, skipping directly to when he had released the first softening charm. From that point on, he explained everything truthfully. As Professor Flitwick listened, his eyes sparkled, watching Kyle as if seeing a young prodigy in the dueling world. Though the moment wasn't right to show his excitement, he patted Kyle encouragingly on the arm. Restarting the dueling club was already on his mind. Professor McGonagall, on the other hand, was focused solely on getting Kyle and the witch back to the castle. The idea of an animagus hiding among the students needed urgent investigation, and she felt strongly about handling it herself rather than involving the ministry. She approached Had and stated firmly, "This witch is connected to our student, and I'll be taking her with me." Had frowned, reluctant to let the witch go. She was, after all, the only catch they had, and if he let McGonagall take her, he'd be left with little more than half a shoe sole to hand in. But with all 3 Hogwarts professors present, he couldn't argue, especially considering what had just transpired. After a moment's hesitation, Had agreed. "Only until morning, Professor McGonagall," he said, adding, "We'll come to Hogwarts first thing to retrieve her." Professor McGonagall nodded, then took out her wand and levitated the witch, preparing to leave. Meanwhile, a large crowd had gathered at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, their eyes fixed anxiously on the trees, awaiting any sign of movement. "Look, Professor McGonagall is coming out," someone shouted. 2 figures, one tall and one shorter, emerged from the depths of the forest. Conna broke away from the crowd and rushed toward Kyle, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Are you okay?" she asked, voice trembling. "Oh, I'm fine," Kyle replied with a playful grin. "Though, now that I'm a ghost, I feel quite at ease." "Ha!" Conna's eyes widened, and fresh tears began to stream down her cheeks. "What nonsense!" Professor McGonagall chided, giving Kyle a light tap. Then, with a soft, comforting hand, she wiped Conna's tears away and said gently, "Take a good look. Does he look like a ghost?" Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 109, Special Award for Services to the School. Despite Kyle's repeated reassurances that he was fine, Professor McGonagall insisted on taking him to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey, after a thorough examination, found nothing physically wrong with him, but after hearing what he'd been through, she insisted he stay the night. Once Professor McGonagall had left, Madame Pomfrey went to her cupboard, took out a bottle, and poured Kyle a generous glass of light blue liquid. "Drink it." Kyle, lying on the bed, grimaced. "That's really not necessary, Madame Pomfrey." The potions in the hospital wing were renowned for their effectiveness, and for their dreadful taste. He remembered Cedric once taking a pepper-up potion for a cold, and, according to him, it had tasted like dishwater left out in the sun for days. It had taken all Cedric's willpower just to choke it down. Kyle had no interest in drinking something just as vile. Besides, the worst he had was a tooth mark on his arm, hardly something that warranted a potion. But Madame Pomfrey was unmoved. With a stern look, she declared, "This restorative potion will help you quickly regain your energy and strength. You will drink it all, or you can forget about leaving the hospital wing." Kyle's face fell. Everyone knew the hospital wing was Hogwarts' ultimate authority. Even Dumbledore yielded to Madame Pomfrey's judgment here. If she decided Kyle wasn't leaving, then he really wasn't going anywhere. Resigned, Kyle lifted the cup and downed the potion. Gulp. After Kyle drank the potion, Madame Pomfrey left. Lying on the bed, he couldn't tell if it was exhaustion or the effects of the potion, but soon his eyelids grew heavy, and he drifted into a deep sleep. He had no idea how long he slept. In a daze, he heard a faint rustling near his ear, like someone munching on something. Eating. As the thought registered, a wave of hunger hit him, growing stronger by the second. With some effort, Kyle cracked his eyes open, squinting against the blinding sunlight. Slowly, he adjusted, taking in the familiar ceiling of the hospital wing, and then the smiling face of Albus Dumbledore. "Good afternoon, Kyle," Dumbledore greeted him, his words slightly muffled as he chewed. An open box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans sat beside him. Kyle blinked, now fully alert. The greatest wizard of all time, the headmaster of Hogwarts, was snacking on his treats. "The table was simply overflowing," Dumbledore said, as if reading Kyle's thoughts. "And I would suggest you avoid this box. I've tried 3 beans, and each was dreadful. I suspect they've been jumbled together haphazardly." "Headmaster, you could try the golden brown one," Kyle suggested, glancing toward the table, which was stacked high with snacks, a literal mountain of sweets. And there wasn't just one table. Someone had pulled over the table from the adjacent bed to help hold the stash. "All gifts from your friends," Dumbledore explained with a smile, popping the bean Kyle recommended into his mouth. "They may have cleaned out honeydukes just for you. Ah, champagne flavor, a rare find." "Headmaster, how long have I been asleep?" 3 hours shy of a full day," Dumbledore replied. Kyle sat up, stretching his stiff neck. He hadn't realized he'd slept so long. It was already the afternoon of the following day. No wonder he was hungry. Wait. The afternoon of the next day. "Headmaster, the Quidditch match." "Ah, yes," Dumbledore nodded. "You missed it, I'm afraid. But Hufflepuff took the victory. They wanted you to know that they played with extra spirit, hoping the win would speed your recovery." "Curse that Orin," Kyle muttered, pounding his pillow in frustration. He'd looked forward to that match all year. "Speaking of Orin," Dumbledore began thoughtfully, "Kyle, do you have any idea why he's targeting you?" "He said it's because of my dad," Kyle replied. "But as I understand it," Dumbledore's blue eyes twinkled, 12 years ago, if it weren't for Chris, Orin would have died at the hands of Death Eaters. "It was your father who saved him." "That's impossible." "If Dad saved him, then why did he do it, repaying a favor?" Kyle said firmly. "He wanted to kill me. If the centaurs hadn't arrived in time, he'd have used the killing curse on me. This is indeed perplexing." "I'm afraid only Orin himself knows the reason," Dumbledore replied softly. "But he's already on the run, and catching a bard is no easy feat, Bard." "Yes," Dumbledore explained. After that close encounter with the Death Eaters, he left and traveled to France, wandering the world as a troubadour. As for when he got involved in magical creatures smuggling, I couldn't say. "Then why did he come to Hogwarts?" Kyle asked, puzzled. "To try to kill me?" "Certainly not, my boy," Dumbledore shook his head. "As I understand it, the Ministry received an anonymous tip in mid-August with details about smugglers' routes. Thinking back, the sender was likely Orin himself, which is why he applied for the Defense Against the Dark Arts position 2 months early. But his reasons remain unclear. Perhaps he sought Hogwarts as a sanctuary, or maybe he needed the funds. It's hard to say, bards are notoriously unpredictable. Hearing all this, Kyle felt even more at a loss about Orin. All he could do was plant more chomping cabbage, and if he ever saw Orin again, he'd make sure the man got a nice, thorny bath in them. This was the first time he'd ever endured such humiliation, and he'd almost uncovered the truth, too. 100 chomping cabbages would be a fitting present for Orin. Now, said Dumbledore brightly, let's move on to something cheerier. For keeping your head in a crisis, using a broomstick to get Conna Prince out of the Forbidden Forest at a critical moment, and for your noble spirit in facing 2 dark wizards alone to buy her time, we have unanimously decided to give you a special award for services to the school. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 110, The Vault Key. Kyle was genuinely taken aback by Dumbledore's words. Only students who have made notable contributions to Hogwarts are eligible for the special award for services to the school, the highest honor a young wizard can achieve during their school years. 50 years ago, the infamous snub-nosed wizard, the originator of the defense against the dark arts curse, none other than Tom Riddle, had received this award in his 5th year. Yet Kyle was only a first year, a whole 4 years behind him. In that regard, Kyle could almost imagine pointing at Tom's face, or, at least, his nose, and saying quite frankly, "You suck." What might happen afterward was another story. "Thank you for your kind words, Headmaster," Kyle said with a smile. He wasn't expressing gratitude for the award itself, but rather for what Dumbledore had just said. Especially the words, "noble spirit." Dumbledore was indeed a remarkable headmaster, able to perceive the inner qualities of a person at a glance. You couldn't argue with that. "You truly deserve this, Kyle," Dumbledore said with a wink. Very few people would have the courage to face 2 adult wizards alone in their first year, let alone manage to defeat one. The board of directors agreed that giving you the special award for services to the school was the best decision I made this year. They probably just didn't want any complications, Kyle thought to himself. He doubted that the school board members had noble intentions in mind. Unlike Dumbledore, who was genuinely dedicated to Hogwarts, the board members were more concerned about protecting their own interests. Had Kyle actually perished in the Forbidden Forest, word would have spread quickly that Hogwarts' defense against the dark arts professor was responsible for the death of a student. By then, Hogwarts would either have to shut down or face severe trouble, which the board, naturally, did not want. Luckily, Kyle had survived. The board was likely using the special award to rid themselves of Chris and Diana. But Kyle didn't care about their motives, he was satisfied with the result. "Headmaster, there's one other thing," Kyle began. "Ask away." "Where's Hagrid?" "I noticed he wasn't in the room." "In fact, Hagrid was the first one attacked yesterday," Dumbledore explained. "Orin tricked him into drinking undiluted swooping evil venom, then hid him in the Forbidden Forest while he was unconscious." "So, where is Hagrid now?" "Don't worry, Kyle. Hagrid is in much better shape than the average wizard, his life isn't in danger," Dumbledore reassured him. "I've obtained the antidote for the swooping evil venom from Newt, so he should be able to return from St. Mungo's soon." Kyle breathed a small sigh of relief, realizing he'd nearly forgotten that Hagrid's half-giant lineage granted him thick blood and a higher resistance to harm. And since the swooping evil venom was less harmful if ingested than if spilled on the skin, it was a relief that the incident hadn't been as severe. "Headmaster, I have one last question." "Go ahead." "That witch," Kyle began, "why is she hiding near Conna?" "Ah, I wondered when you'd bring that up," Dumbledore replied. "I'm sorry, Kyle. This situation involves the Prince family, so I can't share much. All I can tell you is that the witch has sinister intentions, and her goal is a key." "A key?" Kyle asked, frowning. "Yes, a key to a vault at Gringotts," Dumbledore said, almost dreamily. "She occupies a very unique position. If she gets hold of this key, she can legally claim all of the Conna family's remaining inheritance." The word inheritance triggered something in Kyle's mind, and he looked at Dumbledore, seeking confirmation. But Dumbledore offered no further response, as if he had no intention of continuing this discussion. Instead, he placed a box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans on the bedside table and, with a smile, said, "That's enough questions for now. I suggest you start enjoying these sweets." And look, there are mint-flavored cockroach clusters inside. These are a limited edition. If you like, I'd be happy to give them to you, Kyle offered sincerely. He wasn't kidding, he genuinely wanted to hand over those cockroach clusters. But Dumbledore politely declined. Rising from his seat, he said, "Finally, I must ask for your forgiveness. Due to certain obligations, I wasn't at the castle yesterday, and I couldn't come to your aid when you were in the most danger. This was a failing on my part as headmaster." "It's all right, you don't need to worry about it," Kyle replied reassuringly. Kyle didn't spend much time in the hospital wing. Shortly after Dumbledore left, Madame Pomfrey, somewhat reluctantly, agreed to his request to be discharged. As soon as he returned to the Hufflepuff common room, Kyle's usual popularity ensured he was surrounded by a crowd of concerned friends, each eager to check on him. He responded to their questions one by one, taking his time to reassure everyone. About an hour later, he found himself back in the familiar, empty classroom. "Kyle, I heard you took down an adult wizard," Fred exclaimed the moment they met. "Is it true?" "Don't even think about denying it," added George. Someone overheard the hit wizards talking as they left the Forbidden Forest. "Apparently, the witch Professor McGonagall brought back was roughed up pretty badly by you." Kyle rubbed his forehead, exasperated. The hit wizard's sense of secrecy left a lot to be desired. Why hadn't they just sent Aurors for such a sensitive task? "Well, I'm lucky," he said, deciding he didn't mind confirming it. "Honestly, she was just weak. I doubt she even went to Hogwarts." "Oh, come on, that was a full-fledged witch using dark magic." "Don't downplay it," Cedric teased. "You're making the rest of us look useless." "All right, then," Kyle conceded with a grin. "Let's say I barely survived a life-or-death duel with a dark wizard, clinging to life by a thread until help finally arrived." George nodded, deadpan. "Much more comforting. But I didn't expect it at all." "Professor Oren, a dark wizard?" Cedric shook his head, almost in disbelief. "And his class was actually really good, way better than last year's." "Watch it, Cedric," Fred reminded him, "Oren isn't a professor anymore." He almost killed Kyle. "Sorry, just a force of habit," Cedric said quickly, looking sheepish. "No one would have guessed," Cho Chang chimed in from the side. Even Davies couldn't believe it. He thought someone else had used a polyjuice potion to impersonate Oren. "Right, Davies, the one who tried to file that complaint about Oren. He almost got into a fight with you Gryffindors over it," Kyle added. "I remember him," Fred sighed. "Turns out, he was right. We all misjudged Oren." The mention of Oren brought a somber tone to the group. Even Fred and George, usually the life of the party, went quiet. They had liked Oren at first, hoping he might break the curse on the position and stay on as their defense against the dark arts professor. But now, everything had changed. Oren was a dark wizard. They'd Lycal. Why never meet another defense against the dark arts professor as entertaining and lenient with homework? For a moment, silence filled the room, each of them lost in thought. There were only 5 of them here this time. The missing person was Kanna. The recent events involving Pocky, or rather, the witch, had affected her deeply. She'd been staying in her dorm room the past few days, coming out only briefly when Kyle returned from the hospital wing and appeared in the common room. The others didn't know this. Cedric and the rest assumed Kanna was simply frightened by what had happened and was staying in her dorm to recover. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.